Turning compost feels productive, but it's one of the fastest ways to delay real soil formation. I'll say that plainly. Every time you flip a pile to speed things up, you're burning carbon that should have become stable humus in your beds. The real-world result shows up season after season as soil that needs constant inputs, crops that surge and stall, and beds that never seem to improve no matter how much compost you add. Most gardeners are taught that turning equals oxygen, oxygen equals faster breakdown, and faster breakdown equals better soil. That chain of logic is incomplete. Fast breakdown gives you decomposed material. It does not give you soil. If you care about growing food long-term, that distinction matters more than any compost temperature chart. If you want grounded, field-tested gardening like this, subscribe now. This channel exists for people who care about results, not rituals. Turning compost optimizes decomposition, not soil building, and those are not the same process. Decomposition is a biological burn. Bacteria dominate, carbon is oxidized into carbon dioxide, and nutrients are released quickly. That's great if your goal is waste reduction. But honestly, it's terrible if your goal is building humus. Humus forms when carbon binds slowly to minerals and microbial byproducts under relatively stable, low-disturbance conditions. Turning a pile repeatedly resets that process every single time. Well, I tested this side by side for years. One system used traditional turned compost applied annually. The other fed carbon directly to beds without turning anything. After 3 seasons, the turned compost beds still crusted, compacted, and needed frequent watering. The undisturbed beds developed darker soil, better aggregation, and noticeably deeper root penetration. Same climate, same crops, different biology. When you turn compost, you favor the wrong microbes for long-term soil structure. Turning selects for fast, oxygen-loving bacteria. Those organisms are excellent at breaking things down quickly and releasing nutrients in bursts. But, they do very little to build soil aggregates that persist. Fungi, especially saprophytic and mycorrhizal species, are the real engineers of soil structure. They create glomalin, bind particles together, and stabilize carbon. But honestly, they do not thrive in systems that are constantly disturbed. In my raised beds, this difference became obvious within just 1 season. Beds fed with turned compost showed early vigor, but then, they ran into some mid-season stress. On the other hand, beds fed with surface carbon and left undisturbed just stayed even and resilient all the way through. When I dug into them, fungal strands were visible and the soil broke apart in crumbs instead of slabs. That structure honestly didn't wash away even after heavy rain. The obsession with heat is, one of the most damaging compost myths in gardening. People chase hot piles because, heat feels like progress. But honestly, heat is energy leaving the system. When a pile hits 60 to 70 degrees Celsius, carbon loss accelerates dramatically. You're watching future soil literally evaporate. Pathogen reduction matters, but in food gardens, most plant pathogens aren't coming from carbon inputs. They're coming from stressed plants in poor soil. I stopped measuring pile temperatures entirely. Instead, I started paying attention to moisture and placement. Carbon applied directly to soil at moderate moisture, never heated dramatically, yet it transformed faster into humus where it mattered. Weed seeds that survived didn't matter because they were smothered or eaten by soil organisms before becoming a problem. Turning compost separates nutrients from the root zone when timing matters most. Finished compost applied once or twice a year delivers nutrients in a pulse. Plants take some, leaching takes the rest. The soil biology doesn't get a steady food supply. By contrast, feeding carbon in place creates continuous nutrient cycling synchronized with root demand. In a small backyard garden, this looks like adding roughly 1 inch of dry carbon, such as shredded leaves or cardboard, followed by ½ an inch of green material every few weeks. Water it until evenly moist, then leave it alone. Roots grow into that interface. Microbes process nutrients gradually. So you stop guessing when to fertilize because, well, the system just self-regulates. Raised beds actually reveal the weakness of turn compost much faster than in-ground soil ever does. Raised beds drain water more quickly, they heat up more, and they lose organic matter at a much faster rate. Turning compost and applying it as a finished product honestly just accelerates that loss. I've measured organic matter decline in raised beds that relied on turned compost alone. It's subtle but consistent. When I stopped turning and started feeding beds directly, organic matter stabilized instead of dropping. Water retention improved. Beds needed irrigation less often, even in peak summer. That didn't happen because I added more material, it happened because more of the carbon stayed put. Even hydroponic systems reveal why disturbance slows biological stability. Hydroponics are often treated as sterile, but honestly, the most stable systems I've run weren't sterile at all. They were biologically buffered. Systems that relied on aggressive flushing and constant adjustment behaved just like turned compost piles, fast, volatile, and, well, fragile. When I reduced disturbance, lowered nutrient strength, and introduced stable carbon sources like humic acids at low concentrations, around 20 to 30 parts per million, the system calmed down. pH swings softened. Roots stayed healthy longer. The principle is the same. Stability builds function. Constant disruption creates dependence. Turning compost trains gardeners to manage inputs instead of managing systems. This is where I get opinionated. Turning compost keeps you busy without making you effective. It trains you to intervene constantly instead of setting conditions and letting biology work. The best soil I've grown came from doing less, not more, once the system was fed correctly. That doesn't mean neglect. It means targeted action. Moisture matters. Carbon diversity matters. But, mixing, flipping, and aerating are usually counterproductive once materials are in contact with soil. There are trade-offs, and honestly, you should understand them clearly. Not turning means decomposition is slower at first. You won't get a fluffy finished product to admire. Nitrogen release is, steadier. It's not dramatic. If you want a quick green up for heavy feeders, you may still supplement early with diluted liquid feeds. I do. But those feeds work better in biologically active soil than in dead media. So over time, the need for supplementation really drops. Crops, they just start to regulate themselves better, Pest pressure even declines as well. The soil, it stops acting like just a container and starts behaving more like an ecosystem. Real soil forms when carbon actually stays put long enough to become something entirely new. Soil isn't just decomposed material, it's actually transformed material. And turning compost interrupts that transformation at every stage. If your goal is to build soil that improves year after year, stop focusing on piles and start focusing on placement, moisture, and patience. I haven't turned compost in years, and my gardens have never been more productive or more forgiving. The black soil people chase with endless effort forms quietly when you stop getting in the way. If this perspective helped you rethink what you're doing in your garden, subscribe to the Husbandry channel. Share this with someone who's working hard but not seeing lasting improvement. Better food comes from better soil, and better soil comes from understanding how biology actually works.